So, welcome ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this great debate on open access publishing, where we are going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of not only open access publishing, but also open access review, and maybe even we'll talk about open access science in general. A warm welcome. My name is Hubert Savenije. I'm the chair of the Publications Committee of the EGU, and I will facilitate the discussion. And fortunately for you, we have found 4 people willing to present the advantages and the disadvantages in the way as they are experienced by our community. And I will first set out the scene a bit. 15 years ago, more or less 15 years, or exactly 15 years ago, EGU started to go for, decided to go for open access publication and open access review. And the person who initiated that was Ulrich Pöschel, as he is sitting here, and he went in cahoots with Arne Richter to get this off the ground. And Ulrich Pöschel was the first one to start a really interactive open access review journal, which is called ACP, Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics, of which he is still executive editor, or at least until very recent. Of course, the idea behind open access review was that you sort of pull the review out of the hidden quarters behind closed doors, so that the review becomes open to the entire community. That has advantages, that also has disadvantages, but the great advantage is that it is transparent to the community. But we will discuss whether everybody is happy with that or not. One of the criticisms often heard is that when you publish early drafts of a paper, this can create additional noise. Sometimes papers that have not been fully peer-reviewed remain in the ether and get confused with the papers that have later been accepted, or sometimes people complain that they cannot resubmit rejected papers to other journals because they are still somewhere on the web. So these things will come up. But let me first introduce the 4 panelists for you. Ulrich Pöschel, I've already said, he is the director of the multi-phase chemistry department. I have to read that from my piece of paper, of the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry, and he's also a professor at the Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz. Then, to his right and on your left of Ulrich Pöschel is Martin Rasmussen. He is the managing director of Copernicus Meetings and Open Access Publications, and Copernicus has always been the vehicle of the EGU journals. He is also a co-founder of the Open Access Scholarly Publisher Association, and he sits in the advisory board of the Directory of Open Access Journals. So he is a clear proponent of open access publishing and open science in general. He's also a member of our Publications Committee. Then, next to Martin Rasmussen is my great friend András Bardossi. He is a well-known hydrologist, but he is also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Hydrology, one of the top-ranking hydrology journals, which is owned by Elsevier. And although that journal also facilitates open access publishing within its journal, it does not have the open access review. He will definitely, at least he has agreed to play the devil's advocate role and highlight the negative aspects of open access publishing and review. And then finally, on our right is our incoming president, Jonathan Bamber, who is the founder of the open access journal, The Cryosphere. And although he is also very much in favor of open access publishing, he will report on all the disadvantages that the community felt, and probably maybe still feels, what the disadvantages of open access publishing and review are. Having said that, I would like the 4 of you to give a short statement about your views and role in this panel. May I start with Ulrich?
Well, thanks Hubert, and good afternoon everybody. So maybe just to complement, because Hubert already outlined the key issues pretty much. So maybe as a starter, when this whole thing took off in the year 2000, essentially we started to design the new concept of peer review, and then in 2001 it was implemented. And one of the initiating factors was kind of a frustration with the traditional peer review system, which has a lot of flaws that have been documented over and over again, which are hard to fix anyhow with or without transparency. But even when the traditional peer review system works very well, which it also does quite often, even then sort of a lot of interesting information gets lost. So the peer referee reports are often as interesting as the paper itself because they reflect the different views. So it's really the scientific discourse to a large degree is taking place in the review process, right? And so one fundamental flaw, I would say, of the traditional hidden peer review process is this very hidden nature. You're hiding the scientific discourse, the exchange of arguments, which are at the core of scientific progress also. So that's the one thing that is unfortunately lost in the traditional peer review and which we are opening up through our transparent system. And the other thing is, of course, that in a classical system you have then a different pecking orders of journals, and people go as high as they think they might land with their article, and then it's sort of reviewed there. Quite often it's then rejected, and then you do the same game over and over again. And sort of, again, here also this reviewing procedure, you just keep trying in the hidden, and then ultimately it will get published somewhere, right? And also there sort of, in order to stimulate self-regulation, and that's the same in societal life everywhere, in politics and any place you look, when there is transparency, you have some kind of self-regulation also, and you can also follow up on how things are going according to the rules or not, or whatever, the guidelines, if you don't want to talk about rules. And when there is no transparency, that's missing. And so that was the initial motivation, and we have, I think, proven over 15 years now that this is indeed working very well. And I'll wrap up with that, that as far as to the very best of my knowledge, and I have been to a lot of publishing conferences over the past years, our journals are the only ones, literally, on this planet which have the following combination of features: that they have top visibility and a large volume and low rejection rates. So these three features together, and the low rejection rates are coming from this self-regulation. When you go out in public and expose your work, then you make sure it's good and you go to the right journal. And that's, I think, a really unique feature that sort of makes it worthwhile to take along all the other caveats that you have to make the public review practicable, and that we will, I guess, return to anyhow.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, and good afternoon also from my side. To me, the public peer review has two main aspects which I think are very important. The first aspect is that when you see open access really as a principle, and I like the term that we say, okay, we first, beginning of the 2000s, we had what we call open access 1.0. That means just the free access to the journal publication. May it be postprints or even preprints and archive.org, something like this, but just the access. From this access, Open Access 1.0, came very nice evolutions like and developments like authors' copyright, Creative Commons attribution licenses, so very liberal distribution licenses and so on. So I like to stress out that the real beauty about Open Access is that it's the only way how to really make reuse by other members of the scientific community happen. And when you then see, well, it is more a principle than just an access model, then I think it is in Open Access 2.0 relatively clear that you say, okay, I have access to the end of the process, namely the paper. Why not making the process itself freely accessible and making it transparent, which is then half the way to what we call Open Access 3.0, which we also celebrate tonight at the reception here in this room, by the way, 1900. You're all invited. This is then open science. Because if you really say science, I mean, you know this much better than me, I'm just a publisher, but science is of course a continuous process. It's a continuous development of ideas, and the publication is in principle just an intermediate stage where you say, okay, this is worthwhile publishing it in a journal, but you continue, or others continue, and building up on your ideas, and your idea grow and distribute more. And in open science, the idea is that you say, okay, and everything that is close to this article, close to the publication itself, everything that comes out of your work, data, model code, videos, geoscientific samples and so on, should really be freely accessible, all linked to each other through DOIs, to really form a publication cluster. And to me, it is an integral part that you also make your peer review process transparent. And the second point is that it has also very practical implications. Namely, when we started with open access journals, actually a lot of people were against us. We thought we were the good guys, yeah? And we always came to library conference and so on. We thought we are the good guys and the others are the bad guys. But they say, no, you are the bad guys. With your open access, you destroy everything and so on, and you have no quality. What is it for a journal where you can just pay money and then you get your article published? And we said, okay, good. But, and it might even be true, we have something that's called predatory publishers and so on, totally different debate. But what I think is very important is to say, okay, good, I understand the concerns, then let's move on and just make it open so that people can prove on their own whether we apply proper peer review principles or not. And the only way to do this is public peer review, which is only be possible since we introduced open access. So to me, these are the two main reasons why it's very important for us to bring much more transparency into scientific quality assurance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, and we continue with Anders.
Yes, thank you very much. You put me in a very difficult situation. You brought so many good arguments for open access. I would like to think a little bit from the other side. First of all, what is the review process? The review process is, for me, a quality check. In science, this is very important. It's much more important than if you read news in a tabloid, because if the news are false, who cares? Tomorrow you forget it. But if in science you publish things which are not reliable, then next time people may try to build their building on that stone, which is not there. So open access is a different way of doing this kind of quality control. But on the other hand, I must say, reviews are not scientific contributions. They have a different goal and a different format also. I have read, I just counted quickly, certainly more than 10,000 reviews. Horribly boring. I don't want to share my boring experience with you. So I do not agree that reviews are scientific discussions. If they would be scientific discussions, then it is worth to publish. But if you see in the reviews very often, you see, please exchange the word A against B, remove the comma, etc. Do we have to share that? Do we have to bore everyone? So I think that is my first statement.
Okay. Thank you, Andres. Then let's see what Jonathan...
Yeah, all right. So obviously I'm a tiny bit conflicted here, as the incoming president with 17 journals that we publish. But about 9 years ago, we launched the Journal of the Cryosphere, and before we did that, we went through a fairly extensive consultation with our community, a relatively small community within Geosciences, maybe 2,000 people at that time who were publishing in this field regularly, to find out how enthusiastic they were about this particular venture. And so what I'm going to do now is just rehearse some of the arguments that I got from my colleagues, and still do, about the particular disadvantages they see to this publication model. And I think we've already touched on the key message that came back to me from my colleagues, which was about quality and quality control. And we've just heard that reviews are there to ensure quality of publications. And why do you do something in private? You do it in private because there are things you can do in private that you can't do in public. Why do you have meetings that are confidential? Because you can say things, discuss things that you can't do in a public forum. And it is exactly the same with reviews, and that was the belief of my colleagues. So their concern, and it may or may not be legitimate, is that if you make this process public, the reviews themselves become really rather bland and anodyne, and actually lacking in criticality, and lacking in the things that you require from the process to ensure that you're publishing the best quality science. And most of you will probably be familiar with writing references for junior colleagues applying for jobs. And about 15 years ago, I could guarantee that a reference I wrote would stay in confidence with the potential employer. Now, because of freedom of information legislation, that's no longer the case. And what I've noticed when I get references about someone I want to employ, there's almost no kind of useful information in them at all. It'll say things like, I have known this person for 5 years and they did some work for me. Well, that doesn't tell me very much. And it's exactly the same with reviews. And so the biggest concern is that the quality of the reviews, what people are willing to impart, particularly if they are very critical, will be watered down through the process of making it public. I think a second concern, and this is a specific one about the way we do things, is that we require a minimum of 2 reviews, like most journals. The first review goes up, and more often than not, the second reviewer will read what the first reviewer has written, and quite possibly just say something, they're busy people. Well, I kind of agree with the first reviewer. I don't like these points. And so, in effect, what you're getting is an embellished single review. I think the second big issue that my colleagues aired was one over something we call IPR, intellectual property rights. What you're doing by publishing a paper in one of our journals is you're putting it out there for the public, but you lose ownership of it. You lose ownership of the ideas. So who is going to put out some really exciting, novel idea that anybody can go out there and take and maybe publish in another journal, not mentioning any particular names, but maybe Nature or Science or wherever they want to go. So you have lost control over that brilliant idea or those amazing results, and you have no guarantee that what you've put out there in the public is actually ever going to be published in the paper. So these were the concerns that my colleagues, well, actually many of them still have about publishing in the EGU journals, and I think that's probably enough provocative information for now to kind of get things going.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Before I want to open the floor for questions, because this is really what I would like you to do, to come forward to the microphone and ask questions, and then I will see that we get replies from both camps. That would, I think, be the best. But then after the concerns raised by the last 2 speakers, I think it's not a bad idea if I give the opportunity to Ulrich or Martin to shortly reflect on this first. Is that okay? Yeah? can I ask Ulrich to react to Andres's and Jonathan's observations first?
Good, good. Yeah, so I mean, in principle, the concerns are all valid indeed, and are concerns that have occupied us for 15 years. Essentially, some of them actually occupied us only for a few months at the beginning of the 15 years. Some others have persisted. So one thing that indeed did not occupy us for very long is the first concern Andras brought up, because indeed it turns out that the reviews are interesting to the community. People always, when they are really interested in a paper, that's just, we get the feedback all the time, they do go after the reviews and look into it if it's your own research. You don't, if it's a paper that you only want to know the quintessence, you even read only the abstract, right? But if you really, if it's the same research as you are doing, people want to know what has been said about it. And actually you can prescribe, and we do that really general comments of scientific nature are given first, and then you come with the technicalities and so on. So it's indeed a valid thing, but that has been easy to solve, and we see it also sort of the discussions are quite lively, and that goes into what Jonathan has addressed actually. We also were wondering whether all the comments would be artificially positive, or people would get very nasty out in public and we would have to fix things and so on. But in fact, this thing of self-regulation by transparency worked beautifully nicely, that we had not the nasty language that you sometimes get in hidden exchanges. So there is a nice degree of self-regulation, but on the other hand, scientists tend to be critical people, fortunately, and so we have lots of examples. We have published some 10,000 referee comments over the past 15 years, only in ACP. Altogether, Martin knows the statistics better, it's 20 or 30,000 referee comments, plus the responses, and half of them, at least, are really very critical, and sometimes they are at the edge of what is still polite, but mostly they remain polite. So in practice, simply these concerns did not materialize, I can just say, and very quickly, so Jonathan, that was the thing, and the losing ownership was indeed a very early concern, but indeed, of course, you have a named article there with you as an author, and it's archived forever. So also this turned out not to be an issue in the end, if you do it well. If we were to delete the discussion papers, then we would get into trouble indeed, but since we do not delete anything, we have the full record of these things. But again, there are lots of subtleties that we can go into, maybe in exchange with the audience later on.
Anders or Jonathan, would you like to react to this? Or
I will make one reaction to what Uli said, and you know, I guess some of this is possibly a little bit anecdotal, and one case doesn't necessarily, you know, tip it one way or the other, but you will be aware that you published a paper in your own journal recently, submitted by a very high-profile American meteorologist, and you know, it received a lot of press coverage before it was published, before it was a fully reviewed paper, which I think is not exactly ideal. But perhaps more importantly, my impression was, although there were many public comments, that I mean, a long list of eminent authors on this paper, that the referees were perhaps quite nervous about publicly criticizing. I mean, even if you're an anonymous referee, it's public, you know, you will have concerns about actually, well, they'll know who I am. They'll know that I'm making these critical comments about, let's say, 15 extremely eminent scientists. And Uli will be aware that I have some quite serious concerns about some aspects of this particular paper, which, you know, is now published in ACP. So I think that's possibly an example of the kind of reviewer nervousness that can happen when it's in public.
Thank you. I think that it's now time to go to the audience. Yes, please come forward and stand behind the microphone. And say who you are if you want. You can also say that you are anonymous reviewer number 1 if you don't want to do that. But otherwise, just say who you are and then ask the question.
Well, so my name is Martin Brummel, and earlier this year I was a referee for a Geosciences discussion paper. and I was the second reviewer, and as you said, you mentioned that there's a possibility the reviewer 2 reads the first reviewer. I deliberately did not do that, but that was more accident than anything else. I'd already filled out my entire review, and then I said, oh, look, reviewer 1 has already posted, and I just went ahead and clicked. But relevant to sort of the opposite of what you've just been speaking about with these high profile, high discussion, possibly nervous reviewers and these other concerns, what about the opposite? In my case, I posted my review about 3 days before the deadline I was given, and within a minute, I had an email back saying, discussion closed. And I thought we had 3 days for, I mean, maybe no one will say anything, maybe there will be no comments, but I was expecting an opportunity for comments, and I don't know how long reviewer 1's review was up for, but in any case, there was no discussion occurred. And so it felt very much like a traditional peer review in that both reviewers submitted, the editor sent an email back saying, this is the decision that was reached, here's the other person's review for your, you can read that as well, and then the decision was made and so forth. So I guess my question is, transparency is lovely. What if no one's walking past the window?
Who would like to react?
And maybe,
Because that's a kind of, there's a systemic thing there.
yeah, exactly. I just give a technical note to this. This might be that you were maybe relatively late in the discussion phase nominated, and then the discussion phase of normally 8 weeks is expanded to your deadline. So the normal discussion phase would even be over, then you have your deadline, and then of course the system says, okay, after you published your report, then the discussion is really over. So normally if referees, and this is not a personal thing, I want now to say something not nice, but normally when referee comments are early in the process, then there's a chance for discussion. So this is just a technical
By the
note.
way, you can always request the discussion time to be prolonged as possible.
Yeah, prolonged, also by the editor. Yes.
Yeah,
I would like to ask a question. Do you know how often reviews are read? How many papers are really discussed, and how many times it is just like in the normal review process, but people can read it?
Yeah, Martin?
Yeah, this is of course a criticism we often hear, because people say, well, I looked into your journals and actually I find not much short comments, what we call short comments, when the scientific community gives appreciated but not specifically invited comments. This is right, yeah? But I then often say, well, that's not exactly the point I see, because the discussion is an option which is on top. That's the reason why we say, when we talk about the term interactive public peer review, it has two things. It has public peer review and interactive discussion in it. And I think even if a paper gets no short comments from the community, just the two referee comments and the answer by the author, in form of an author comments, it's worth having this public peer review. Then you had no discussion, that's right, but at least you gave people A, the chance, and B, you make a transparent peer review. Yeah. And I like the idea that we have on top of this the chance for the community to react. And if we really have critic papers, like the paper you referred to, the recent one in ACP, which had more than 100 comments, or we had 2 years ago an ACP NICE case of more than 60 comments. So if there's really something which puts the community under stress, then people use the option. I had a very nice discussion yesterday at a short course, because there were a lot of early career scientists, and they said, well, yeah, very nice, and you might think that we as early career scientists like it a lot. Actually, to me, it is, if there's really such a hot topic, I do not want to burn my fingers. Yeah, because I'm early in my career and I don't want to argue with the very established scientists, and I understand this. That's, by the way, the reason, and I wanted to say this regarding the commenting and watering down the process. That's the reason why it is so important that the referees have still the option of being anonymous. Yeah, because we are often mixed up with open peer review. This is a different thing. When other publishers talk about open peer review, they mean a traditional peer review, but the referees have not the chance to be anonymous, and they think that's a solution. And in Uli's concept, in those days he said, no, it must be public. But we cannot force the referees to be eponymous, or whatever how you pronounce it in English, but they have to have the chance to stay anonymous, because otherwise, I absolutely agree, people could destroy their career, and then the only chance is to watering down the criticism.
Yes, any reactions to that? Or is it,
Maybe just a very quick follow-up really on this statistical thing, because indeed one in ACP at least, but it's similar for most of our journals, 1 in 4 to 5 papers only gets this additional comment, right? On average, in reality it's even a bit less, and some get more comments and so on, right? But 1 in 5. But the point is, if you compare to traditional journals, only 1 in 100 papers gets a commentary with higher. And so in that sense, it's a huge increase of commenting and interaction, although it's many papers indeed just go through with a regular peer review that is made transparent, and that's it, and nobody is missing anything indeed.
Just one very quick comment, because I know there's quite a lot of questions. There's a big difference between public anonymity and private anonymity.
yes. And it is what Dimitris calls eponymous or anonymous, Dimitris. You get the opportunity. I saw 1, 2 hands here, and yours, and 4. What I suggest is that we take now 2 questions at a time. Your 2 hands, can we see first you, and then you just state your name. Yes, please come forward. State your name and the question, then I will take your question, and then we, yeah. Please go ahead.
Well, sorry. My name is Thomas von Klarmann, KIT Karlsruhe. Sorry, that's no question, that's a comment. So I think the alternative to the open peer reviewing is not the traditional peer reviewing that, say, JTR or the other journal has. The only other thing I can imagine which could have advantages over the fully open reviewing system is the double-blind peer reviewing, where the reviewer does not know who the author is. Otherwise, there still, in the traditional peer reviewing, there could still the same problems as with the open peer reviewing. So I think we should decide between both these extremes, because the thing in the middle shares the disadvantages of both.
Good. Noted. We will react to that after hearing the second question.
Yes, hello, Julian Fahl in Luxembourg. When one starts to discuss such an issue, one realizes very quickly that it opens up such a number of questions and problems that sort of encompass the entire system of peer reviewing. So I'll just concentrate on one question. And it just came to my mind because there are so many editors in front of me now. And in the end, in the actual system, the final decision is still in the hands of one person, which is the editor, whether it's a closed discussion or an open discussion. I very much prefer open discussions, and I've made wonderful experiences in exchanging via emails with reviewers. But in the end, it's the editor that decides. About a year ago, a couple of scientists launched a website that's called the Self Journal of Science, where the entire discussion is open and never closes. Yeah, which opens up a completely different outlook on science. So what do you think of your role as editors? Would you rather not do it? Andras was mentioning the boredom as well. So my question would be, after that lengthy introduction, do we really need editors in the end? Or would that also be a step forward to think of a system that doesn't need one person pushing a button at the end of the review process?
Good. Nice. Nice. Who can I give the floor? Andras?
Yes. I would say that quality, as I told, quality control is important. And we select for the journals people whom we trust. whom we trust that they do a job which is really serious. And that means that we delegate them this possibility to say this is something which should be open for public because it's scientifically reliable, you can build on it. And if we delegate this to everyone, then we are in big danger that things will go wrong and go in different directions. In a certain sense, the open access peer review is control of the editors. And we are living in a world where everything is evaluated, controlled, etc., which means we are in a very inefficient mode because we spend a lot of time in trying to look around instead of concentrating on our main job, which would be the science itself. So in this sense, I feel that if we would give trust to the editors, then the open access review has much less real importance. I'm not against open access review in the sense that I can defend my decisions, and if I have an author who does not like my decision, he will complain. That's one of my jobs, to make it clear why certain decisions were taken. But I'm not necessarily willing to share this critics with everyone, because you are also not only doing good to the authors, but you are doing bad to the authors if you make their possible overseeing something public.
Other reactions to the two questions? Ulrich?
Yeah, maybe very briefly. So double-blind peer review is a very old concept which has been tested over and over again. It never really worked because it was inefficient on the one hand, and on the other hand, within a small community, people mostly could guess who it is anyhow from the description and so on. So it's a long story, and there are lots of papers on this topic. By the way, there are also papers that have evaluated our approach, and they were totally independent, was sociologists essentially, and it came out very well in this context. And the double-blind peer review did not do so well because it didn't work out as intended. But again, it's a different concept. And with regard to the openness without, my initial concept in 2000 was to put just the discussion paper out there and then optionally have revised versions and so on. So that was a less well-defined thing and so on. But I think it wouldn't have been as successful as it has been, because we have all our innovative journals in the top ranks of all statistics you can think of, essentially. And I think that time is not ripe for this thing yet, and this pure post-publication reviewing. Also, there have been the British Medical Journal in 1998 or so already started such ventures. And since then ever, people have been doing that, and they get too few comments. So the pure putting things out without any moderation or so seems not to work properly in our field so far. I hope it will at some point, maybe. Then we have less boring things to do. But currently it's not working yet. And so in principle, it turned out that this combination of classical system, where we maintain everything in our system, plus transparency and interactiveness, really lets you do the full thing, whereas those things doing away with editors and even with appointed referees and so on, simply by experience over the past decades, have not been flourishing.
Thank you. Yeah, you want to add to this, Martin?
And I wanted to add to the question, do we need editors at all, and so on. I think that editors still play a very important role in building up the reputation of a journal. And actually there are some very nice working groups going on, also some of them supported by the European Commission, where it is where they want to find measurements to measure early early, how it's called, young journals. Young journal, that means, okay, I'm not yet in Thomson Reuters, Monopoly, Science Citation Next, okay, but I'm still a journal, I'm still good. How can you measure me? And there, for example, the established status of editors play a good role. The good thing about public peer review is that in principle, even if you as a reader, you as a community member think that the editor did not a good job in either accepting a poor paper or rejecting a good paper, the good thing about our public peer review is that you can judge on your own. That's a good thing. That's also one of the reasons why we do not delete discussion papers which do not make it until the final stage. Because if you, for example, see, what, this colleague, he's an excellent scientist, why is the paper rejected? You can read the discussion paper, you can read the comments. Maybe even lots of people from the scientific community or from the referees said, well, it's a great paper, but nevertheless, the editor had the last final word and said, no, I reject it. Okay, but you can create your own opinion about it. The same with articles which are finally accepted, where you think, well, I think it's a poor paper, but you see how the paper was in the beginning, how the referees made it maybe better and what it was in the end. And so I think that the idea here is also to say, okay, we have some parts from traditional peer review and traditional settings in scientific publication, but we also add a transparency which gives you, as a scientific community member, much more independency in using your own experiences and your own ideas to judge on your own. This is what I like very much about the concept.
By the way, not everybody may be aware that there is also a blind second stage after the public discussion forum, where the revised paper is again evaluated by the editor, who will often send it back to the original reviewers, and that is hidden to the public until the paper is accepted. After the paper is accepted, we also make that, let's say, hidden part of the review process, which is more in the traditional sense, also available to the public. But it still indeed has an editor making the final decision, and it would indeed be interesting if somewhere in the future it's just the community that discusses it, and after that it's up to the author to submit a revised paper. It could be possible. I think that also having editors to sort of raise the status of the journal is not necessarily the same as having that editor making the final decision. So it is definitely an interesting model that maybe in the future will come up. I would now like to ask Dimitris. I saw a hand of Dimitris and I saw a hand of you. If you two line up for the two next questions.
Yes. I am Dimitris Koutsogiannis. I am editor in Hydrological Sciences Journal for 10 years now. I'm also editor in HES, and I have been associate editor in Water Resource Research, Hydrological Sciences Journal, etc. So I can second what Andras said, that I have, most of the reviews are boring, and perhaps, Andras, I have also read about 10,000 reviews as an order of magnitude, but I would say that it is the task of the editor or the associate editor to read the reviews, but it's not any duty of the reader to read the reviews. So it doesn't make any damage to the reader if the review is public. Okay, so this reminded me a very hot discussion, blog discussion that I had. I would not say the name, actually he passed away, about whether raw data should be available or not. And I supported that the raw data should be available online. He supported the idea that only the processed data should be available, and the people should not be misled by raw data. Well, usually somebody doesn't use the raw data if there are processed data, but there are some times that there are errors in the processing. So the raw data should also be available. It's the same discussion. So let the boring reviews be somewhere in the net, and sometimes there could be a need to go back in time and see what happened with the paper. This is the first comment that I had. The second comment, before my second comment, I would say that as SSJ editor, I had the opinion before he has become open access, I had the same opinion for SSJ. But this was not possible for SSJ because it is a very international journal with readership and authorship for very poor countries. And this is the point, because the very poor countries, the very poor people, like Greece, for instance, cannot afford to pay for open access. I have experience from both systems, and I could say that, well, I don't like in the open access system of HES, I do not like the fact that you can be an anonymous reviewer. Actually, from my big experience as author, I can say that there is no anonymity, and personally, I know particularly the most negative reviewers of my papers. I know who they are. And there is no double-blind system because as a reviewer now, I know who the author is, even if the journal pretends that this paper is, the authors of this paper are blind for me. So this is just a game. So you always, or 99% of the time, you know who the authors or the reviewers are. So I think it's time to stress the idea of eponymity instead of anonymity, and this also strengthens the idea of accountability. I see many people asking for accountability in reviewing, but this is very simple. Sign your review in order to be accountable. There is no other way. I mean, that the journal publishes a table with the reviewers, this doesn't make sense. The accountability should associate the exact review content with the author. Otherwise, you mix up the boring reviews with the really interesting reviews. Okay. I have experience also from my reviews being cited. My HES reviews being cited. Okay. So, and the last point, a very small point, a very short point, is that in the joint editorial that is now published in 7 hydrological, or 8, is it 8, with Hubert and Andras about publishing in hydrology, we also made another point that even the journals without open reviews could also publish interesting reviews that are eponymous along with the paper. And this could be also very useful in cases of very different opinions between authors and reviewers. So you invite the reviewer to make his point eponymously in the journal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitris.
My name is Pavel Grossman. I am associated with several institutions, one of them UCAR, at National Center for Environmental Information in Asheville, North Carolina, other in Russia, and private company. I serve as a guest editor for more than about 10 years for one journal, for one international journal, a review, also hundreds of papers, and then on editorial board on another journal. So pictures are very different. But let's remember, from papers which people send to high quality journals, let's say 30% are good enough to work with authors and improve it. Here, anonymous editor is very helpful. He straightforward point on the questions, ask to do some additional job, work, improve the paper, and finally it is published. But 70 others are on the level of no repair. And you have to tell them, it's very nice to write a review for nice paper. Yeah, joyful, several paragraphs, and it's over. But bad papers are danger. First of all, you spend much more time explaining why it is not good and giving recommendations. And if it is public, 50% of chances that you will get enemy. With all this nice word, or only 50%. But if it is 5%, it's also bad. And I completely support opinion of Jonathan Bamber that open access has much more cons than pro.
Okay, thank you.
Next, about data. Some countries impose regulations on their data use. If you put restrictions, give raw data, let's say for any paper which is related to China, you will be restricted to 198 stations, where there are 5,000, something like this. And you cut off all these people with your record. We are open, please. They may be happy to be open, but they have government restrictions. And there are many other such. You get data from private company who want to sell it, etc., etc. It is ill-conceived idea to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to react?
I would.
No? Jonathan?
Well, actually, I didn't get a chance to the whole editorial thing, whether editors are of any use at all. But I think actually listening to the comments that we're getting, I think a lot of them are all around the same basic issue, which is, we want to ensure that we have high quality publications appearing in our journals. And a lot of these things relate around how do we ensure quality. And so the editorial issue, I think, okay, so there's a lot of information out there. There's lots of sources of knowledge. How do you decide what you believe and what you don't? Just ask yourself that question. And probably one of the key, I know one of the things that I do, I know which are highly reputable journals I trust, where if a paper has been published in that journal, I have greater faith in it than if it appears on a blog or website or in a climate change, whatever, And why is that? Well, in my view, it's because you have high quality editors acting as the gatekeepers for that publication. So that's why I think a journal is only as good as its editorial board. Okay, so that's one point. And then more generally about quality control. I think I'm not sure necessarily that either model, public or private review, results in better quality control. I'm actually ambivalent about that one. I'm not necessarily convinced that, all right, you have a record, it's there, and people can look at it, but I don't know if it results in a better paper at the end of the day.
Yes, first of all, I would like to make it clear, reading boring reviews is not that bad. I'm very proud to be an editor, and I like my job very much. So don't think that this is only bad. I have the feeling that we follow a certain false assumption, and this kind of false assumption is that our time is infinite. We have a very limited time, and there are so many publications, so we have to select. And among this selection, one of my guiding principles is I'm reading where I'm from the very beginning have some trust. And this trust is, for me, the review process which is behind it. So I'm not looking for unpublished papers which are in a certain kind of debate. And I also tell my PhD students first read the things which are already well established. So in this sense, you might not really profit too much from the reviewing part. But I wanted to bring in another point which might be nasty. But you know, yeah, I'm the devil's advocate. I can also be nasty. I think there is a kind of economical point behind this. Because in open access, you pay for publications, and many journals which are not open access, they're the readers paying. In one case, the author is paying, and the other case, the reader is paying. And if the author is paying, the author is very interested to be treated correctly. If the reader is paying, then you have to make sure that the reader gets something what is worth reading. So in this sense, it is clear if you are publishing open access, then you have to make your reviews also open access.
Okay. Yeah, Martin, would you like to react to this?
Yeah, the first point regarding the infinity or limitation to the time. I think this is also a major advantage of this public peer review process, because we think that we could have shown in the last 15 years that in disciplines with normally much higher rejection rates, we have very low rejection rates, and so low that sometimes at publisher conferences the others laugh at me, because they think, how good can your journal be if it's only 15% rejection? The idea in those days was also to say, okay, if you publish your paper relatively early, so in principle just the manuscript, quick check by the editor, that's it, then you have a discussion paper, people maybe think a second or third time before submitting it. So we think that we have shown by the public peer review that we decrease the number of poorer submissions, which is to the benefit of the reviewers, which of course have no time, because the scientist today has so many stupid things to do besides science, administrative work and so on, and of course the time is limitation, and it's very important for all of us that we do not harm referees with stuff which is then a waste of time. Yeah, that's my main point. The other I forgot.
Yeah, Uli?
Maybe actually just to follow up, because Jonathan also had brought it up, and I fully agree. I think in the end, the average quality of the final article in a journal depends essentially on the editors of the journal and the referees whom they consult, which is at the selection of the editor. So the average, I still would think that it's slightly bit higher through the transparency, because every fifth paper gets an additional comment which the editor did not solicit, right? And so I would argue that this is a zero-order approximation, 20% increase of quality control, sort of, right? And we can discuss it further if we had time. I would strongly argue that the zero-order approximation holds. But indeed, it's sort of relatively 20%, not 100 or 50 or anything. So and then coming back to what Martin said, what I tried to say initially also, it's really, and we have proven that simply, and we could go through that, we have plenty of statistics by now, and actually these studies that were done about us, there are multiple ones, they all agreed to it and pointed out, we have these little rejection rates for the same quality that other journals, roughly the same quality, where other journals need 50 to 70% rejection rate, we need only 15%, simply because of the self-regulating principle of transparency, which is at work everywhere in human society. Whenever you have a closed shop system, things in the long run go wrong if it's too closed. I mean, there is some privacy is a good thing everywhere, but if it's very closed box, it tends to go wrong in the long run. And if you have some transparency adequate, for example, we maintain anonymity, then actually it tends to self-regulate. That's in politics, that's everywhere the same thing. And we have proven for 15 years now that it does work statistically in our case. And a very quick thing to Dimitris, because he didn't get any responses. So I'm fully with you there on all your points, essentially, except that I think the eponymity should evolve by itself, which it can in our journals, right? We don't want to force people to do it. And it's somewhat similar with the open data issue. It's a bit more a publication by its very Latin origin is meant to be publicly available, whereas data, of course, some of them, we had it in the later comment, some of them it's more difficult, but we all want to go for the full open access. Also, open data is the next big topic. I think open access will be implemented widely within the next few years, not open peer review, but open access will be mainstream very soon. But open data is something where we should move cautiously to not get into trouble that are more subtle than for publications.
Okay. Thank you, Uli. I would like to misuse my role as moderator to also challenge you a bit. You all talk about quality, but maintaining quality does not necessarily mean rejecting. I think rejecting an innovative paper is even worse than accepting a paper that may not be completely correct, but which may later turn out to be not correct, but at least the science is right. Now, I see as a great advantage of open access publishing that an extremely controversial paper can be discussed openly, because the experience is, and Dimitris once showed a very clear example of that, the experience is that really controversial papers that challenge the practices of today are often rejected, and not rejected once, they are rejected repeatedly in different journals, because it goes against the common understanding of the scientists. And these papers are, in our open access system, at least get the opportunity to be discussed, and even if they are rejected, which I hope they are not, then you can always still refer to them. And maybe you can, because quality is not rejecting papers, quality is maintaining quality. Yes. Uwe.
Let's hear from the audience.
Uwe Ulbrich, I'm one of the NHAS executive editors, and we have had experience with, well, some people might say innovative science, others might say pseudoscience, and groups of scientists that actually use the system of public peer review to post a fairly large number of comments where you sometimes think of, well, how I better stop that. And this could be, well, we experienced that with a certain community. There are others around, just to mention, for example, chemtrails that you have certainly heard of. And I wonder what the experience is and your thoughts is about such groups of scientists.
Very good point, Uwe, because that's the downside of what I was just saying. Who would like to react to that? Okay, probably all of you, but Jonathan starts.
So I'll just reply to Uli and also that comment. So if we go back to this high-profile paper that I was talking about, now Uli claims that actually our discussion phase increases the quality, but if you look at that, there were an awful lot of comments that just generated noise, because in our system, anyone, you don't have to be an author, you do not have to be a scientist to post a short comment on a paper. And there were comments which, it was just noise. And actually, I think that distracts from the real scientific issues and the real review comments, because in fact, the author, the editor, and the referees, that, you know, they're seeing all this kind of, a lot of it was nonsense, you know, it was people who didn't understand basic laws of thermodynamics, you know. And I think that that raises a number of issues, and so I'm not so, I would question whether the discussion phase from non-referees actually improves quality or just makes it harder for everyone to do their job.
Yeah,
Ulrich?
well, I can answer that because very clearly this one issue with this high-profile Hansen et al. Paper in ACP on climate change and ice melt was sort of a really exceptional paper. So we have published some 5,000 roughly, I would need to get the data from the editorial office, papers in ACP, final papers with lots of comments. And this was the single one which really got to the edge of the system. And I'm sort of quite happy with it that the system did cope with it. We had some noise indeed, but that actually goes back to the comment of Uwe. We had people denying thermal radiation, which is really sort of against the basic principles of physics and natural sciences. And indeed, this was in the middle of the summer where everybody was on vacation. It was the worst possible case that could happen. The handling editor was on vacation and so on. So, but still actually, there was one thread evolving out of these 100 comments. Indeed, some 15 plus minus X were indeed sort of futile noise to us, but I think they will do their job in at least rebutting also in public. People can see how clearly these nonsense arguments are rebutted. It went back and forth, and in the end the handling editor was back from vacation and said essentially, oh, I declare this thread closed. He did use very, very lean words. Meaningful comments on other topics are still allowed, so you could do the same thing on chemtrail discussions or whatever. And indeed, in this public forum, unlike blogs, which are often going off scale, it stopped. So we did not have to go after it. And so even though our tools were not optimized yet for something like that, because it had never happened, and in the normal atmospheric community, these climate change denier stories do not go on, so we were not prepared for it, and still we coped with it. And if you prepare for it, I think you can stop it even earlier. You can make mechanism of not admitting such commentators repeatedly and so on. So I think there are tools to cope with it, but it is a challenge, I agree.
Yeah, other reactions from the audience? Yeah, please come forward.
I was wondering, like you mentioned.
Please state
sorry,
your name
my name is
first.
Rudolf Rietbroek, University of Bonn. You mentioned the finite amount of time people have. I think journalists have even less amount of time. How do you think your open public review process could aid in filtering out, we just discussed this, useful comments which are then readily fed to journalists such that they can make an accurate description of the paper?
Who would like to react?
Well, actually, we don't have that much experience because normally we are doing hardcore science where there is not that much of a flurry. But again, with this one paper in 5,000 now, we had the experience that really some journalists and their articles in their journals were of surprisingly high quality with regard to both spotting the flaws and the interesting parts of this paper, or the potential flaws, right? I mean the questionable things, and also of spotting, for example, of saying clearly this was a discussion paper, it was not the final peer-reviewed paper. So I think journalists who do a good job have an easy way with us actually to, it's all spelled out publicly, you can easily go after it. Oh. Journalists who are really getting hurried.
Ole, I don't believe that. Well, because the author had press releases when it was still a D-phase paper, and this was hitting the national press across the United States.
Not across. Actually, they were disappointed that it was not so widely
radiated. We're not going to get 100 comments again, are we?
And indeed, no. But just to wrap that up quickly, because indeed that one high-level article that was the Washington Post that clearly stated it is a discussion paper undergoing at the beginning of peer review. It's not a peer-reviewed study. And then, unfortunately, in the blogosphere or so, a lot of nonsense came up indeed. But this one early article did a surprisingly good job at stating the facts.
Yeah, Anders?
Is one article an argument for open access peer review? Yes, the question came up, but I would certainly be very interested in the authorship of open access journals. You said that you have a low rejection rate, which is very good, but you might lose, for example, a lot of young people who are afraid of going into an open access journal because they might be the object of some harsh critics, and from that moment, if you apply for a job, they do not only look at that you have 3 papers published, but they will find your early sins and can use and misuse it.
Yes, that's a very valid argument, and that's why we indeed get a high level of quality to begin with. And indeed, a lot of our colleagues, and it's really a high-level journal in its field, a lot of our colleagues have difficulties of keeping their PhD students and postdoc out of ACP. They want to publish broadly, right? They don't want to publish in one journal only, out of many reasons. And actually, mostly it's the other way around, that the younger scientists actually do not want to go anywhere else anymore because they see it's fast with the discussion, it's public, it's transparent. So with their good papers, they tend to come to our journal. It's a simplified statement. It's not always true. And there are situations where it's difficult when it's rejected. So there are critical situations, and it's up to the editors to manage these properly and so on. So it's a valid concern, but experience of 15 years and thousands of papers shows that actually the young scientists at large tend to like it very much.
And it also fits to the practice that they are used to. They are used to making debates on the internet. A great advantage is that when you get a review, you can react immediately and you can get a reaction back. It's not waiting until everything is in. You can already start a discussion earlier. And I have always experienced that young people find this much easier to do than the older generation. Martin?
Yeah, it's also something I want to say, and also to come back to Jonathan's very first statement, because Jonathan also said, when he talked about the watering down maybe of criticism, I also wanted to mention that it might be that, I mean, often very good concepts are too early. Yeah, this shows history. And I think that the public peer review model will even, in some years from now, even be more accepted because the younger generation, and in principle I'm also from the younger generation, but I'm not used to Facebook and so on, but the others, yeah, in my age and older, they are very good in having these debates, and to them it becomes more and more natural that you just not put out stuff, but you put out stuff and others comment on it and you have a discussion and you take part in discussions. So this sharing of opinions and making this public, I think this is a big difference to the more established scientists. They, I think, of course, have debates every day scientifically, but it's more in a traditional way. And I think the younger generation learns it from the very first beginning to have public debates. And I think that this will help maybe both for the criticism as a referee, but also as an author to be confident to go into the public with my paper. So I'm very interested to see this in the next years.
Yes, please, raise your question.
This is way too tall for small people. We've had a question via Twitter.
Can you first say who you are?
Oh, sorry. Well, it's not from me. We've had a question via Twitter by David Miller, who says, open peer review has its risks. Have you considered peer review before results are known? And he follows that up with a little explanation as to what he means by that. And he means a registered reports publication format, where publication format in which peer review occurs before results are known. Researchers submit research questions, sampling plan, and specific analytical plan to confirm the hypothesis testing before the data has been collected. The proposed studies are that both 1 is needed in a field regardless of the answer, and 2 is able to answer the question definitely past this stage 1 review. Publication occurs regardless of the results as long as the researchers do what has been proposed and what passed peer review.
And that's that whole message in one Twitter?
No, that was a photograph. That was a photograph because he asked me to make the question and I didn't understand, so he sent that as a clarification.
Okay, good. Who would like to react?
Well, maybe just a quick reaction. I think there is a lot of interesting thoughts and concepts out there, and when I started this public peer review interactive thing that the one version of it. Now we have multiple versions. Every journal is tailoring it to the needs, and I think that's a very good thing of its community and so on. But when we started in the year 2000, this thing that is now well established was also totally unseen, and people said this will never work and so on, right? So I had lots of feedback like that, and this sounds to me like something where I now also don't know how it will work, but it sounds like an interesting idea. I think people should just check their ideas. There are multiple things out. It's this PeerJ and various other things where you have these forums and so on that are less formalized than our journals. Our journals are really sort of an integrative step between traditional publishing and these totally less formalized new forms of publishing, and maybe they will in the long run take over and evolve further. So I think there are many of these ideas that are worthwhile to be tested. Indeed, those people who are in their communities get some response to it. They should just test and see how it works, and we will also evolve our journals. I guess both the traditional ones will evolve and the interactive ones will continue to evolve.
Yeah. Maybe a last question to Andras. Have we been able to convince you a little bit?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say, I was asked to play this role.
I know.
I was put on the list of the bad before I was asked, really. So this is the first thing. The second thing, I see both have advantages and disadvantages, and we should not be in a religious position, and our journal also publishes, there is this Journal of Hydrology Regional Studies, which is open access, and for the published papers, the reviews can also be published. So we are, the journal is not completely against it. I'm still seeing advantages and disadvantages, and I would say it is important for the authors to select. But I wanted to raise the last little problem, which is maybe killing all of us, is this enormous nonsense pressure on publishing. So why is it's better to publish 3 papers as a PhD student instead of 1 good paper? And their open access or not open access, open peer review or not open peer review will not help. None of them is making our life easier.
That is a really rather different.
It's a different problem, but it puts us in a very difficult position.
I would just, well, directly maybe back to Andras, very briefly. I fully agree with you that this publishing pressure is something where we need to ourselves just take out the pressure from the PhD committees and so on. But I would not agree with you that it does not make a difference, because also, I published it long ago, so I can prove that it was indeed the intention of what we are doing, that you give more weight back to the individual paper. And I can tell you that indeed, if you have a paper with the interactive peer review open and so on, people do look. In our community, it's so well established, people do look also when they decide about which postdoc, whom to hire, and also for faculty positions, people do occasionally also look at the discussions, and so you can give more weight to an individual, technically more weight to an individual paper by publishing the reviews, even if you publish them afterwards. I think publishing them afterwards, like you do partly, is a huge step from not publishing them at all. And in my opinion, if you make the whole thing interactive, you give even more opportunity for this thing. But again, that's not a fix for everything.
Yeah, I think that's
it does help.
a little bit disingenuous, really, because actually, you know, if you have someone who has 3 papers in Nature and Science versus 3 papers in ACP, it's going to be the former that's employed, and none of that is public.
Well, but
so you know, I mean, in terms of just kind of, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, points, they will win every time, irrespective of what's out there for an employer to see. But that's a different issue again.
But is this also your final statement, Jonathan, or would you like to make one?
That's fine. Yeah, no, I'm good.
Martin, would you have a final statement that you would like to make, having heard the whole discussion?
Yeah, my final statement would be to forward a wish that came up in many discussions with early career scientists, because they said, okay, if you really want to make this work for us, this system, you have to find a way to give us credit for reviewing and for commenting. Yeah, this is something, I don't know if you know Pablons. Pablons is an initiative started something like this, where you give not only your publications in, but also the reviews you have given. And they give you credits for it. So you, because we all know that the scientists have a high number of jobs, research and teaching, but then being editor, being a reviewer, being an author, and so on. And to really give credit for this, we have to come up with something where we really can say, yes, it's not only a valuable thing that you publish, but it's also a valuable thing that you help others to publish by reviewing and by being an active member of the community prior to publication by commenting. This is something, I like this wish a lot, and it's definitely something we should think about. How can we support this so that younger early career scientists can really say, yes, I clearly see my benefit in making and taking part in your whole procedure of public peer review and interaction.
Yeah, Martin, it may be that if you start providing this kind of information, like how many reviews did people do, that university administrators will be very happy, and they will readily, if you generate an impact factor on review, they will take it on board because they like numbers. And then soon they will start counting the number of reviews you've done. Okay, I think we have reached the end of this great debate. I would like to very much thank the panelists, and particularly the two who played the devil's advocate, because that's the most difficult role. Thank you very much, Andres. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And I would concur completely with Andres that there is not one prescription of how it should be. Please let there be many ways of doing it, because we will only learn by testing different modules over time, and by that we can serve our science community best. So please give them all a great hand. And thank you very much for your interest.